Today's scripture reading comes from 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. The Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand, morning and evening. Jesse said to his son David, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers." David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the Israelites, when they saw the man, fled from him and were very much afraid. The Israelites said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel." David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight the Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David, with his shield-bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. When this Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. To welcome Ayn Craciun.
so much. Thank you for your warm welcome. Thank you, Pastor Sarah, for inviting me and the Green Faith Committee, and Chuck Heath for making this possible today. My name is Ayn Craciun. I am with Climate Action Campaign. The purpose of my talk today is to explain to you all how you can fix the climate crisis and environmental justice in Orange County. This is within your power. I'm going to just introduce my organization briefly, give you an update of where we are on the climate crisis, the big solutions that are available to us, and kind of a to-do list of things you can do going forward. We have about 15 minutes to do all this, so let's get going. So you already know a little bit about me, but Climate Action Campaign, as has been said, we are a nonprofit climate policy watchdog. Our mission is to end the climate crisis through effective policy action. We were founded in 2015 when our CEO was the chief of staff for San Diego's mayor at the time and had written a really groundbreaking climate action plan for the city. That was going to go before the council for adoption. And she looked around and saw that there was no way that this plan was going to get adopted with the current political dynamics that were at play in San Diego. And so she left the mayor's office to found Climate Action Campaign to build the community will that would be necessary to deliver the political will to allow this policy to be adopted. And as a result of that, in 2015, San Diego adopted what was then a first in the United States. It was the largest city in the United States to adopt a legally binding commitment to reach 100% clean energy by 2035. And since then, that same goal has been adopted by both the state of California and President Biden. And so we see local policy change and local policy, city policy, as like a laboratory and a place where policy can be proven and then scaled and replicated at the local and national scale and have a real big impact. So our theory of change is first we build community will, and that's why I'm here today, and then we build political will, and then we win. And this is a winning formula that's worked again and again, and I've seen it happen myself. So I really appreciate y'all having us here today. So next slide. This is a picture of me and my colleague Lexi. We're a team of 2 here in Orange County in front of Irvine City Hall recently. This was a LA Times story about a big policy win that we had. So in Orange County, we focus on 100% clean electricity and on all electric homes because those are the policies that are available to us and major sources of emissions in our region. And we do all of this work. Next slide. These are our 5 fights that we engage in. In San Diego, we have a bigger team, so we work on bikeable, walkable neighborhoods, world-class transit, resiliency, which is shade trees and everything else that especially communities of concern are going to need heading into this terrible, conflagration that we'll be immersing ourselves in and that we are already in terms of the climate crisis. But you'll see 100% clean energy and all electric homes at the bottom there, and those are our fights in Orange County. And we do all of this through a lens of equity and justice, recognizing that those who have contributed the least to the problem are going to be those who suffer the most. Next slide, please. So we recognize that our fossil fuel economy has always required people and places to be sacrificed for the profits of fossil fuel companies. And so it persists to this day. This is a result of historic injustices that continues to manifest. Today, the best predictor of whether you live near a source of pollution is the color of your skin. And this is not because minorities and low-income folks like to live near sources of pollution, but again, because of these historic injustices. So we need to, as we look at policy, we need to prioritize those policies which will rectify these injustices and protect those communities in the future. So we really cannot overstate the trouble that we're in on the climate crisis. And you can see on this slide, this shows the temperatures that we have experienced for the last 200 years-ish. So we are really in a place where we are out of time for small-scale thinking. There is more carbon pollution, more climate-causing pollution in our atmosphere now than there has been in the last 800,000 years. And sometimes I get the question from people, they say, well, why now? Like, we've been burning fossil fuels for a long time. Why is it now that is the moment? And the reason for that is that carbon pollution, especially CO2, stays in the atmosphere for a long time. So y'all have heard of the Titanic. So the coal that was burned on that Titanic to plow that boat into that iceberg is still in the atmosphere. CO2 stays in the atmosphere for hundreds to thousands of years. So all of the coal and the gas that was burned in your parents' first car, the carbon pollution from that activity is going to be driving climate impacts for many years to come. And so we are just in a really, like I said, we cannot overstate the trouble that we're in. And human life has developed in this sweet spot, this Goldilocks zone that we really need to sustain life on Earth, especially in the way that we do it now. We need to stay in this 1.5, maybe 2 degrees Celsius band of warming, and we already have baked in 1 degree. That is according to climate scientists at UC Irvine that I've spoken to. So what do we need to do to be climate safe? According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a body composed of scientists from around the world, what is necessary is to immediately and rapidly achieve large-scale reductions in carbon emissions. And this is from the 2021 update. Notice the immediate and rapid part, okay? That's very important. In 2018, the IPCC came out and said that we had 12 years to cut emissions in half. For a lot of reasons, nothing happened after 2018. You all probably remember it to one degree or another. And so, unfortunately, we cannot argue with physics. And so we just have less time now and more to do, a steeper climb ahead of us. So we have this sort of vanishing window in front of us at this moment. We have about 7 years. We really do need to reach zero by 2030, according to the latest climate science, because factoring in committed emissions, things like the gas car in your driveway that you just got last year and you're not going to get rid of anytime soon. So we need all new machines that come online, all new power plants. These need to be 100% clean energy, zero carbon sources. And if we don't, here's the problem. So the physical, biological systems that we've relied on throughout time and throughout the last 200 years especially to absorb this carbon pollution we've been chugging out, the sea ice at the poles that reflects heat back into space, that's going to disappear, and so then ocean water is going to absorb heat instead of reflecting it back out. The Amazon will lose its ability to absorb carbon. Wetlands all over the world that today absorb carbon will instead become methane chugging machines if we reach this 1.5 or 2 degree warming band. And so that's why, I mean, there is the IPCC UN body, the scientists, is a consensus body, and so these are even somewhat conservative estimates. There is, science that says we need to do things even more rapidly. So we don't have any time to quibble, and we don't have time to waste. We need to focus on big-scale solutions and infrastructure that are ready to scale today. And the good news is that all the technology that we need is available today. The solutions that we need are available. All that we lack is the political will. And so we need to start where we are and do what we can, and we can do a lot. I love this saying. So I wanted to say also, because it's Earth Day and because you hear a lot about the carbon footprint, I wanted to just flag for everyone that the carbon footprint calculator was literally invented by the fossil fuel industry in 2004 by British Petroleum in particular. It's a very successful marketing campaign that transferred the focus from the fact that these companies' whole business model is built on destroying our shared home and causing, misery worldwide, and instead have you focus on recycling your plastic bags. So whenever you find yourself thinking about, what can I do? Plastic bags. I want you to understand that you have fallen into that fossil fuel trap and instead shift your focus to systemic change, the city that I live in. So this next slide these are the 3 convenient truths. We've heard of an inconvenient truth related to climate change. These are 3 convenient truths. As we discussed, that greenhouse gases cause climate change, but according to the United Nations, more than 2/3 of emissions come from cities. And here we are in a city. And the really great thing is that you can change your city. And I've seen it happen. And especially where we are in Orange County, we find ourselves in Orange County, in Irvine nonetheless, at this unique time in history. Irvine is, you might say, the economic center of Orange County, according to many people. Orange County is the third most populous state in California, the sixth most populous county in the United States. And actually, there are a lot of political watchers in Washington and at the national stage watch Orange County in particular, knowing that our particular sort of cultural and political dynamics are an indicator of what is possible at the national level. So what happens here matters very much. And so we have made huge strides in many other places in terms of climate policy. In most cities in Orange County, and there are 34 of them, there's not a lot going on. So it's just a ton of opportunity before us, and that's good. So I want to highlight, let's be optimistic here. So next slide, this shows the impact of talking about those individual changes, personal, footprint thinking. So this is for a policy that we got adopted in February of this year by the city of Irvine called Community Choice Energy and 100% renewable energy through community choice. So according to the city of Irvine, doing that will reduce emissions just in the city of Irvine by 360,000 metric tons a year. So this shows the individual impact of climate actions, and at the top you see added up the impact of all the other actions that an individual could potentially take. And this is according to pretty authoritative science that people have looked at. Okay, let's look at individual impact and what could you really do as an individual. And the biggest one is have one fewer child, live car-free. Both these things are really hard in Orange County, plant-based diet, etc. And so all those things together are literally not visible on this graph compared to the impact of this policy change. And so now this assumes one person could do it by themselves, which they can't, and it was more than one person that contributed to this. But even if you move the zeros over, there's still no contest. This is absolutely the kind of change that we can make. This one is in the done column, check, check. So I want to talk also about what is possible and what is next for us. So in terms of buildings are the second leading source of emissions in our region. And so in addition to the emissions from electricity that's generated to power those buildings, which we've addressed through that policy that I just showed you, there's also gas, an awful lot of gas that's burned in our buildings. And you may not realize it, but every time you take a shower or turn on your stove or turn up your thermostat, it's very likely that there is a methane gas-powered appliance that is chugging in the background. And so this is a problem, and there are city policies that address this, okay? And so these cities have been adopted elsewhere, and we need to make this happen in Orange County. And so buildings in particular, they have a 50 to 100 year lifespan. This is just like the facts of life about buildings. And so if we are going to if we're going to reach 2030 zero carbon or even 2045 zero carbon, we cannot afford to be putting together any more buildings that are going to be reliant on gas. So the policy that's available to cities is to require that all new buildings be all electric. And so this is totally possible. And then the sort of next level policy that we would want to see is plans to retrofit existing buildings and help people at scale switch out their hot water heaters, help them switch out their gas stoves, prioritizing communities of concern. And this is important from a climate perspective and then also from a health perspective, because the health impacts from these gas appliances are huge and are being felt now, and that's on the next slide. So, well, this is the gas consumption by appliance. You can see 90% of gas in the home is from heating of water and space, and then 7% is from the stove. But in terms of health impacts, the stove is the biggest violator, sort of. Because it is in a central place in the home, and it's causing outrageous levels of air pollution in the home. A child in a home with a gas stove is 42% more likely to have asthma than a child in a home with an electric stove. And next slide, according to research from Stanford University, these gas stoves leak all the time, even when they're not on. 3/4 of the emissions from a gas stove come from the fittings and pipes that are behind the stove while the stove is off. And so we need policies that are going to remove these stoves, especially in communities of concern. And this is an environmental justice issue because folks in low-income communities and communities of concern are usually living in smaller homes, right, with more people, that are older and have worse ventilation systems, and they're already experiencing environmental health issues and higher degrees of pollution from outside their homes. And so there's a lot to be gained, I mean, for children and pregnant women and for the elderly. The health benefits alone make this worthwhile. Because the gas contributes to respiratory disease and cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of benefit to be had here. Next slide. And this shows some more about the health issues, the health impacts. Next slide. We have all this clean energy now, right? So this is another headline that we saw after Irvine's vote. We have 100% clean energy that's available, clean electricity rather, so let's use it. Next slide. In addition, these changes will bring huge savings for the average California household. The average California household will save more than $2,500 a year on energy costs by changing to clean electrification. And anyone who has an electric vehicle versus a gas car right now can tell you what that's like. In addition, next slide, these changes will bring thousands of new jobs. And these are jobs in our attics and in our garages, changing out this equipment. These are jobs that are good local jobs that cannot be outsourced. So there's a huge economic benefit as well to making these changes. Next slide. The good news is that there are 54 cities in California that have already adopted these policies. 0 of them are in Orange County at this time. We were very optimistic last year when we saw the Irvine City Council, and some of you may have gotten emails from me about this. Irvine City Council voted to authorize staff to move forward with community outreach, so talking to folks about the possibility of a building electrification policy, and then also perhaps drafting such a policy. Yay! But then what we have seen more recently is concerning. They have canceled a building electrification policy event that was supposed to happen in March. There's no word of rescheduling that event. We understand that city staff has been meeting with fossil fuel, SoCal gas representatives, and with local developers, and they do not want this. And so the answer is that we want it, so we need to show our representatives that we want it, and so this is where the David and Goliath part comes in. So what we're hearing is that building electrification policy is dead in Irvine. Irvine being the only city so far that's taken any steps toward it. And with that map I showed you with building electrification policies up and down the state from Humboldt down to San Diego, and Orange County, this big dead zone between LA and San Diego. So of course we can't let this happen, and we're not going to. Because everything is on the line, and this is for all the marbles, and we have this vanishing 7-year window, right? And so I had mentioned the story of David and Goliath to Pastor Sarah because it is very instructive, and the good news is that sometimes David does win, right? There are conditions under which David wins. So unpacking that story of David and Goliath a little bit that we heard, as you may have noticed, David is courageous. One of the most important things about that story is David steps up to the battle. He doesn't go back to his room to play, to watch Netflix or whatever. He says, yeah, I'll go. And so he steps up to the fight, and then he wins really because he thinks about the problem differently. Saul gives him the big helmet and the armor and whatnot, and he looks and he's like, I can't do this. This isn't me. And he says, so he puts him down, and he says, well, what can I do? What do I have? And he looks around. He's resourceful. He sees 5 stones in the creek bed, and he picks them up and he puts them in his pouch. And then this is also key, is that the giant underestimates him. And we have this going for all of us, is that, as Cesar Chavez famously said, power makes you stupid, because True story. So, because then you begin to rely on these sort of like structural advantages that you have when you're in a position of power. But our love for whatever is important to us on this earth and the young people that we care about, these are all, renewable resources for us. So we do not want to waste these renewable resources. We need to think of ourselves as activists differently. Maybe if you don't see yourself as an activist, maybe you see yourself as a musician. We need a better climate anthem. Y'all can do some singing. Like, I was listening to that song that you were singing earlier about, being the change. Like, what if the Irvine City Council got to hear that? Like, I don't know, like, there's so much that is possible, and you could really creatively approach what you can do. If you're a knitter, like people knit the, like the warming bands, and there's just so much you can do. So I want you to look into yourself and see what it is that you have available to you, because that's what it's going to take. Irvine is the fastest growing city in California, also, in addition to being the third most populous in the state and the sixth most populous in the US, and being a bellwether of what is possible at the national stage. And here we are in Irvine on Earth Day in 2022. So I want you to think about, in this moment, what you want your legacy to be, how you want people to talk about you after you're gone. I think about this a lot, especially as a mom. And so don't worry about what you can't control. Just think about what is within your control, which is a lot. I have this QR code down here to sign a petition that, thank you, Pastor Sarah. I'm going to hold up for a minute. We need to stop obsessing about small consumer purchases. I'm just going to hold this so everybody can take a picture. So we need to stop, again, obsessing about small consumer purchases. And we need to sweat the big stuff. We need to keep an unflinching focus on big policy decisions and on city policy. We need to bring it, I'm gonna keep it on this side so folks can. Okay, so we need to like bring everything it is, whatever it is we love, whatever it is like keeps us up at night, and all our systemic advantages if we have them, and all of our love. And this is a petition. When you take a picture of this, it should prompt you to open a little web browser where you can go to this petition and just enter your first and last name, and it's going to send an email to the Irvine City Council saying, good for you, Irvine City Council, keep going, please, we need this. And so it's very positive. And then also I invite you all to join the Orange County Climate Coalition is a group that we created last year to create a place where folks can learn about like how to navigate a city council meeting, learn about these policies and how to advocate for them, and then get together with other people. We're having a meeting tonight, and it is at 6:30 p.m. It is via Zoom. We always meet via Zoom. So let's see. I'm going to hang out afterward. I am happy to give anyone, you can, let's see. Yeah, my email address is Ayn, A-Y-N, at climateactioncampaign.org. And so you can email me, and I'll send you the information about tonight's meeting. But yeah, and then also, of course, if anyone can donate to Climate Action Campaign, that will help support our work and can ensure that we can continue going forward. You can do that, again, at our website, climateactioncampaign.org. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you again, Pastor Sarah. Happy Earth Day.